Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you all for joining us here today to discuss the very important issue of the imprisonment of Imam Jamil Al-Amin. Joining us in this discussion is his son, Brother Kairi Al-Amin. He's an attorney, business developer, and serial entrepreneur with a background in social justice, entertainment. He currently owns a music company, and he is working on the campaign and leading the campaign along with his mother, to free Imam Jamil Al-Amin. We're also joined by El-Hajj Mauri Saalakhan. He's a Metro Washington, D.C. based human rights activist, author, lecturer, and poet. His work has taken him across the world, including the Indian subcontinent, the Middle East, and he's the founder of the Coalition Against Political Imprisonment and the National Association for Police Accountability. He also founded and formerly served as the Director of Operations for the Peace Through Justice Foundation, and he serves as Director of Operations for the Afia Foundation. And finally, we are joined by El-Hajj Amir Khalid A. He's an internationally recognized community activist and leader who formerly served as assistant to the Public Safety Director for the City of Cleveland for Youth Gang Intervention. And he knew Imam Jamil Al-Amin and worked with him on gang intervention work. Thank you all so much for joining us. I wanted to start with Kairi. If you can just tell us who is your father, Imam Jamil Al-Amin?
Sure. Well, assalamu alaikum first and foremost. I appreciate y'all for having me. I'm glad I was able to make it. And you know, I appreciate every opportunity to kind of widen the base when talking about my father and his situation. Imam Jamil Al-Amin, formerly A-Trap Brown, is a humanitarian, I believe, first and foremost. You know, he's a human rights activist more than just a civil rights activist, because as he transitioned out of being A-Trap Brown of the civil rights movement, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, et cetera, after he took his Shahada, he applied those same ideologies to what he now understood to be human rights, because Islam doesn't separate based on race and things like that. So he still understood the African American plight in America, but he also began to recognize the others, such as the Bosnian plight in Kosovo and things of that nature. And so, you know, he just continued his struggle with Islam as kind of his guideline. Before it was a conscious level of struggle, but it became real conscious struggle when he was able to add Islam into the mix. And you could see his organizational background in how he was able to grow the Islamic community here in the United States. And, you know, how people from all backgrounds, Muslim people from all backgrounds, recognized his leadership ability and put him in those leadership positions and flourished because of it. And so, you know, he's a champion for people. And so that's one of the reasons why it's sad that we haven't returned his efforts in kind. We have to champion him. One of the movies that's getting ready or actually comes out today is Judas and the Black Messiah. And one of the things as a people that we tend to do is watch these movies and separate them from our current realities. And so we look at movies like that and we say, oh man, that's crazy. I can't believe they went to such lengths to do that to someone. Well, they're still going to those lengths to do it to people. And we can't wait until the movie comes out 20, 30, 40, 50 years after they're gone to realize that these things happen. We're telling you they're happening now, and he needs our assistance.
Absolutely. And that movie, Judas and the Black Messiah, is about the killing of the Black Panther leader in Chicago, Fred Hampton, killing, and also the fact that an FBI informant infiltrated his group and informed on him with the FBI, and he ended up being killed in his own bed by the Chicago police. Brother Mauri, you wrote this book, The Imprisonment of Imam Jamil Abdullah Al-Amin. Can you talk about how you came to write about this book and tell us a little bit, give us some background on the case? The case began almost 21 years ago. If you could just talk about, what is the case of Imam Jamil Al-Amin?
Okay, it would be more accurate to describe my role in that book as being the compiler of it, with a number of voices that came together for the book. I did most of the writing, but again, it was a collaboration of a number of folk, and it was I guess you could say the continuation of a small booklet that we published shortly after the trial of Imam Jamil. What masqueraded as a trial ended, you know, a couple of decades ago. When that trial ended, we knew that given all of the disinformation that surrounded the case leading up to the trial, during the trial, and in the immediate aftermath of the trial, that, you know, we needed to take the advocacy for Imam Jamil, the public advocacy, to another level. And part of that decision was to publish a small booklet. We ended up publishing 2 editions of that booklet, The Case of Imam Jamil Al-Amin, Is It a Government Conspiracy? After the second run, I think the total run of both editions was about 5,000 copies total. For a number of years, it was just out of print, and we were getting calls from different quarters. One of the main persons who kind of stayed on me, asking me when, Brother Saalakhan, can we reproduce the booklet, was the late Imam Khalil Abdur Rahman out of Greensboro, North Carolina. So finally we made the decision to republish it, but we didn't want to republish the same booklet because so much had occurred over the years. So we decided that we wanted to enlarge it. So that's when we began the process of, you know, making a decision as to how we were going to enlarge it. And that involved bringing some other voices into the mix, expanding the book to talk about different aspects of Imam Jamil's legacy of struggle over the years, and alhamdulillah, it culminated in the imprisonment of Imam Jamil Al-Amin. Is it a government conspiracy? For me, Imam Jamil, his case is a very transcendent case. I often refer to the case as being not just a litmus test for the African-American community, for the Muslim community. It is also a case that has a number of precedents connected to it, very important historical precedents. And our brother Khalid will get into some of that, no doubt, when he recounts some of the history of Imam Jamil, that he has personally with him. But in short, let me say, just a few days ago, for the first time, I became aware that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. came up on the late and infamous in many quarters radar screen of the former director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, in 1955. He came up on the radar in 1955 after the Montgomery bus boycott. And he, you know, remained on the radar, became one of the central figures on the radar in the years to follow. If that could happen with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., someone who was who for most of his years was a civil rights advocate for nonviolent resistance. Imagine, you know, what the view of the former H. Rap Brown was, who then later became Imam Jamil Al-Amin. What we know for a fact is that there was a continuity in the government's surveillance of Imam Jamil from his days as H. Rap Brown. There was a continuity of attempts to entrap him, to capture him by or to nullify his work by any means necessary. And ultimately, we saw the culmination of that in the arrest of Imam Jamil for something that he did not do. The evidence, all the evidence suggests he did not do, and he has denied responsibility all these years consistently, and you know, leading to where he is today. There's just this unbroken continuity. As we often say in our area of our human rights work, COINTELPRO lives.
In that case that you mentioned was a shooting in March of the year 2000 of two police officers in Atlanta, on the west end of Atlanta, where Imam Jamil Al-Amin had his community, his mosque, where they were going to serve a warrant. And there were many inconsistencies. The story kind of changed over time. The police officers initially said that the assailant had gray eyes. Imam Jamil has brown eyes. The police said that the shooter was 5'8". Imam Jamil is much taller than 5'8". And in fact, there was a man by the name of Otis Jackson who confessed to this killing, this shooting 20 years ago. Brother Kairi, do you want to tell us about Otis Jackson? And I can also play a clip of some of his testimony on the case.
Sure. Yeah, Otis Jackson, or James Santos, he goes by a number of names. He has been confessing to this crime since day one, and still confesses to this crime. So just as long as my father's been in prison, maybe every 4 or 5 years or so, we get a new version of the confession, which is still the same. It's just we'll get a written copy. Now we have a video copy. And so he's been very, very consistent in his confession. We actually recently were able to uncover a video that we found from when my father was getting ready or on trial at the time of the news people interviewing Otis Jackson in his home. And they asked him, are you 100% sure that, that Imam Jamil didn't do this? And he's like, yeah, no, I'd bet my life on it, because obviously he understood that he was he was the real perpetrator. And so, we've been trying to get this confession entered into the record, but the problem is our original attorneys did not put Otis Jackson on the stand, and so he's not technically appeal material because he's not what's known as new information. And the reason he wasn't put on the stand is because the prosecution fed us the story that he would be unreliable, that his mental state wasn't, that he wasn't mentally competent, etc. But since that time, he's actually had to go under a mental evaluation so that he could testify in another case. And that is actually the case where he ended up confessing on that stand to this murder as well, once again. And so he's competent, he's lucid, he's consistent, and he has, the facts that other people didn't have. Plus, he has a bullet wound in his shoulder from that evening. And so, yeah, no, it's really ridiculous at this point that we have to show much of anything else, but there are so many other inconsistencies in the case, but that's the big one.
And the police officers had testified that the person who shot them was himself shot, and Otis Jackson said that he was shot. I wanted to play a little bit of that video that you mentioned. I'm going to share my screen now. And this is from the website, if people want to see it themselves, called What Happened to Rap with the number 2.com. And I'm just going to play this video.
Yes, sir. All right. Yes, sir. October 13th, 1997 to December 22nd of 2000. Yes, sir. All right. Isn't it true that during that incarceration, you contacted the Federal Bureau of Investigations and told them that you had committed a murder and were involved in the shooting of a cop in March of 2000 in Atlanta, Georgia? Yes. You did? Yes. All right. And you couldn't have because you were in prison in Nevada, right? No, sir. I got out of prison in 2000 in February. I was on house arrest when the murder took place. You might want to check that out. I was on house arrest. I was staying at 2380 Jernigan Street, Southwest Atlanta. You just said that you were incarcerated in Las Vegas in 1997 through December of 2000. I went back to prison after that shooting. I was violated and sent back to prison after the police shooting. That's why it says BP by my name. That's parole violation. If you look at the photo, it says BP beside my number. That means parole violation. You violated your probation because you went back to prison. Exactly. I violated after the shooting. You were interviewed by the Federal Bureau of Investigations for that out there in Nevada prison, were you not, in July? Yes, sir. Of that year? Yes, sir. And he ruled you out and said you did not commit that murder in Las Vegas, correct?
I don't know what.
That murder in Atlanta.
I have no idea what his conclusion was, sir.
All right, you weren't arrested for it, were you?
No, sir, I was
In
not.
fact, another person was tried and convicted.
Jamil Al-Amin, yes, sir.
Yes, sir. And once again, it seems to me like you were getting a lot of.
I was shot that day.
I'm sorry?
I was shot March of 2000. It happened March 17th, 2000.
Your Honor, we can take a break right now. Come back. Okay. All right, we'll take 10 minutes.
After that, I'd probably need a break too, because that was information that was never supposed to make it into the record. As you can see, they try to discredit him at every turn, but.
So this was, that was your voice, Brother Kairi, saying after that, I probably need a break too. So can you explain, this was a different case you mentioned.
Right.
Otis Jackson, AKA James Santos, goes up there and once again confesses to this shooting, and then the prosecutor takes a break. Can you explain why this evidence hasn't figured into any appeals? You mentioned because it didn't make it into the case to begin with, but yeah, if you can explain that.
Well, I mean, it's the way the judicial system is set up. There are rules and procedures that you have to follow in the court system, and it's supposedly in place to make sure that the system remains streamlined and it's not clogged up with unnecessary litigation and things of that matter. But what it does is, in situations like this, it precludes us from introducing anything that we knew about and could have introduced in the original trial. But alhamdulillah, the case is currently reopened and under investigation by what's called the Conviction Integrity Unit in Atlanta. And that unit is a unit that was put in place by the former district attorney here in Atlanta, or in Fulton County. And what it allows you to do is submit any information that may show that a conviction was incorrect or the integrity of a conviction was compromised. And so they're currently reviewing everything, including the Otis Jackson confession, as well as the constitutional rights violations, the faulty ballistics, et cetera, the misidentification and all of those things. But what they've told us is that, you know, they need more. And so we've hired an investigator, and he's working on giving them the more that they say they need. But what we need from the public more than anything is some kind of just outcry of just being upset. Like this is wrong, even if he wasn't Imam Jamil. Like at this point, it's like, what are we doing? He's currently also being housed, and I'm sure we'll get to this, but he's being housed in federal custody out in Arizona. He's gone blind. They won't treat his eyesight. He has cancer. They've classified him as the highest level of health risk, which is a level 4, but they have him in the level 3 facility. But also he needs to be back in Georgia, not just so that he can get the proper care, but because he has an open case. He has an open case and investigation that's going on that he can't partake in because he's removed from the jurisdiction that everything is happening in. And so at this point, it's an exile and it's unfair. It's not a fair opportunity to clear his name. And so that's what we're fighting for. We're fighting for his health on right now, as far as what the people can do. We're fighting for getting him moved back to Georgia. We need him to get cataract surgery so he can see and be able to take his medications. And we need him in Georgia so that he can communicate with the people who are involved in this decision-making process.
Thank you. I did want to tell the audience, again, you can watch that full video on what happened, the number 2rap.com. I wanted to bring in Brother Khalid also into the conversation. If you can tell us, what was your reaction when you found out about the arrest of Imam Jamil, and maybe the greater community's reaction, the Muslim community, the Black Muslim community? I think you may be on mute.
How's that?
Yeah.
Okay. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Wal 'asr innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa 'amilu salihati wa tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr. Can you hear me? Alhamdulillah. To the host of this timely session, to my brother Kairi, brother Mauri Saalakhan, and to you, Sister El-Arian. This timing is unbelievable. I live in Cleveland, and the movie about Fred Hampton Jr. Fred Hampton was actually in Cleveland. They did the movie in Cleveland. Did you hear about that, Kairi?
Is that right?
Yeah,
Wow.
they had it. The movie was staged right there in Cleveland, not too far from where one of my offices was, the work that I do. And Fred Hampton Jr. was on the scene quite often. And you all remember Fred Hampton Jr. is the son of Fred Hampton, who was murdered by the FBI and the police in a raid on a so-called Black Panther Party headquarters. And you know, it's just not ironic, but it's very eye-opening and ear-opening to hear this talk about what Imam Jamil went through. And at the same time, an almost parallel situation with our brother Fred Hampton. But as to the question, and thank you for inviting me and asking me, I was actually on Hajj when the incident took place. And I thought that was, and not only that was I a lot of people in our the community that was headed up by Imam Jamil was on Hajj as well, because he had facilitated, along with some other Muslim leaders, an opportunity for many people to go on Hajj at a discount rate. So he was working doing even before that time and what was going on with the Hajj and making it available for people in different cities that were connected with the leadership of the community called Al-Ummah. So we were told about Imam Jamil while we were on Hajj. And other key community leaders and other key leaders within our Ummah leadership was also out of the country on Hajj during that time. So we were on the phone talking a lot about what was going on when we finally were able to get through, and we heard what had happened when they described to us during the time that the first set of witnesses had saw a man standing on a street corner holding his stomach, because his stomach or shoulder was bleeding. I can't remember which one. He might have been bleeding in two places. There was also a woman who told one of the sheriff's doctors, one of the sheriff from that county, that the man that should be looking for is a man that was about 5'6", 5'8". And as you know, Imam Jamil is about 6'4", 6'5". The other thing is that we understood that in conversations with the people that were there on the scene when the shooting took place, that the very vehicle that was used as evidence was towed away from the area of where the scene took place of the incident. It was never seen again. And then later on, all this other information began to come out from young men who were formerly part of street organizations that went on Hajj with us. But also when we got back, they immediately got, with some of these guys that are part of the organizations that at one time that they were in fact leaders of. And Otis Jackson was one of them. Otis Jackson was a member of the Vice Lords. And he never wavered on that. He said, I'm a Vice Lord to the bone, to the end of the game. But he had taken Kalima Shahada, you understand, and had relationships with other Muslims. And then we began to hear from other people that were in the community during the time that the shooting took place, and none of their eyewitness accounts jive with what the deputy sheriff, who said that he knew for a fact that he had shot one of them. And Imam Jamil was not shot. So that is a very, 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 what do I say, an eye opener. And then, just the lies just kept coming from there to different things and never stopped. And that kind of takes us into the reason why Imam Jamil was such a dynamic, multi-dimensional leader, because he brought that history that he had as a former Black Panther. He brought that history as a Black nationalist, a Black activist. He brought the history that we were working on with during his direction and the other leadership in the United States. We said we were going to help to reduce gang violence and help brothers and learn how to, de-escalate as opposed to retaliate on each other and all these things. So 10 of the top street organizations in this country joined in a ceasefire and a truce to help reduce gang violence and all the other things that go along with that. And that particular effort was the most remarkable, the most impactful, one of the most successful national crime and safety initiatives in the history of the United States of America. I'll go to bat on anybody knowing what took place after the work that was going on during that time.
Thank you so much for that background. Brother Mauri, can you speak to some of the surveillance that Imam Jamil and his family endured? And Brother Kairi, I'd love to hear you talk about it too, throughout his life. Even at some point, Sister Karima Al-Amin, Imam Jamil's wife, being asked by the FBI to inform on her own husband. Yeah, if you could just give some background on how COINTELPRO and FBI surveillance figured into his life up until the time of his arrest.
Well, COINTELPRO, the counter government's, the FBI's, to be more specific, counterintelligence program was a very, very wicked surveillance system. And it was not just a surveillance system. It was a system that was infused with agent provocateurs, along with the surveillance mechanisms that they had in place. And anyone that Hoover and his clique deemed to be a quote unquote threat to national security were targeted. Everyone from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his organization, the SCL, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, other civil rights organizations on the left, to, you know, some of the activists oriented and to be quite honest, some of the violent activist oriented predominantly white organizations on the left, to the, you know, onto the Black Panthers. You know, Malcolm was a target before he was assassinated, and just a whole host of others. And they engaged in all kinds of nefarious activities to try to sow discord, to sow violence between groups, sometimes within the same organizations. You know, I mean, they just did all kinds of things. And H. Rap Brown was listed along with Dr. King and Malcolm and a few others as a very specific target. Now, what we know from, you know, some of the what is that called? What was the legal term for that, Kairi? The kind of investigation that goes around these criminal prosecutions and the lead up, both on the defense and the prosecutor side? Discovery, yeah. What we learned during discovery was that, you know, there was a continuity of surveillance of Imam Jamil and the community that he led. There was a continuity of surveillance. And no doubt, there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that along with that continuity of surveillance, there were agent provocateurs that were insinuated in Atlanta, that were insinuated in other parts of the country. For example, in Detroit, where Imam Lukman ended up being, you know, eliminated through a highly questionable police orchestrated task force raid in Detroit, Michigan, took his life. And he was someone that was very close to Imam Jamil. So, you know, we had this continuity. COINTELPRO never ended. It officially ended, but it went underground. It became even more muscular, especially after 9/11. And one of the other things that I think is very important to point out is that there were a number of very high-profile Zionists. One in particular, I see his face in my head right now. He's out of Philadelphia, long-term mischief maker. Daniel Pipes. Yeah, Daniel Pipes. He actually wrote a piece that got quite a bit of attention within certain circles. Less than a year before this whole thing went down with Imam Jamil, where he actually named Imam Jamil as someone that he and others had viewed as, you know, a major cause of national security concern in the United States. And so, you know, one of the arguments I've been making for a number of years, Sister Laila, is that Imam Jamil as an individual and his case as an individual case is highly significant for a number of reasons. One of those reasons is that Imam Jamil as a political prisoner is a bridge between two generations of political prisoners. He comes out of the turbulent 1960s, one of the most turbulent and significant decades in American history in terms of struggle. He comes out of that. He was one of the prominent personalities as a very young man during that whole struggle. And so he represents the political prisoners, many of whom are still locked down, most of whom have died off. And the newly minted political prisoners, most of the majority of whom are Muslim, who were deviously minted after, well, beginning before 9/11. Your uncle, Dr. Mazen al-Najjar, is a example of this. Some were minted before 9/11, and then, but the vast majority coming after 9/11. So Imam Jamil is a critical bridge between these two generations of political prisoners, and this is what makes his case so significant, and one that we should be giving far more attention to than we have given to date, especially our major Muslim and non-Muslim Black organizations. You know, we have not given the kind of attention to Imam Jamil's case, given the precedent-setting nature of it, that we should have. And you know, as a consequence, we have been paying a price for that.
Brother Kairi, can you talk about, thank you, Brother Mauri. Your father's trial took place after 9/11. Can you talk about how kind of the fear and hysteria following 9/11 figured into the atmosphere around the trial? Did the prosecution kind of stress his, I'm sure they stressed his Muslim identity, but if you can talk about that, and also about the impact of surveillance on yourself and your family.
Sure. Yeah, I'll start with the 9/11 question, because it's interesting, because I was 12, and so in present tense, when I was there, I don't know, but looking back on it, yeah, 100%. I'm sure that it played a major role. But the thing is, my father's unapologetically Muslim, so they didn't have to impress upon anyone that he was Muslim. He was on trial with a thobe and a kifaya on. So
yes, he was.
they understood what it was, and he wasn't going to put a suit on because it made it look better. It was, you know, I'm Muslim, this is what it is. And if anything, his stance would have been, had he not been on trial, that the government had something to do with that, as opposed to the people they were blaming. And so, yeah, no, most definitely the times had a bearing on the outcome of that situation. I don't think it was necessarily possible to get a jury of his peers up there unless you had a Muslim jury in that climate. So yeah, no, it was huge. It just happened, and here you have a Muslim leader and cleric who is unabashedly Muslim on trial for something else that is heinous. You know, he didn't do it, but it's a heinous crime, and so somebody got to pay. I'm sure is in the minds of those 12 jurors. As far as surveillance goes, I mean, I've seen my conversations in paperwork with my father, you know, so I know they're not just listening to him, they're listening to me, they're listening to my mother. And it's just always been a part of our our understanding in our everyday. It's normal. We understand that they're there. You know, we've been receiving FOIA documents, Freedom of Information Act documents from the FBI for the last, I don't know, 5 to 10 years or so. And we got a new one recently that says there was an informant from 1999 in our community that was passing them information on multiple situations involving my father. And his prominent, it would have been, it would surprise people. And so, you know, the whole, are there informants, and yeah, there are, and it's not the people you think, and it's they're good at this job. If they've been doing it for 20, 30 years, they're very good at it.
Yeah.
Especially, and we're not even talking about 20, 30 years anymore. We're talking about 60, 70. So, you know, the program, like Brother Mauri Saalakhan said, didn't go away. COINTELPRO didn't go away. It got better, it evolved, and it became something that no longer was in the public eye, but it's still working and working very well.
And I wanted to quote from an article that Hamza Raza, who's a journalist who's been covering the case of Imam Jamil Al-Amin, wrote. He's listing kind of the extent of the surveillance, and he says the FBI compiled a 44,000 word file on Al-Amin and his Muslim community, repeatedly attempting to pin him with a crime. Between 1992 and 1997, authorities investigated Al-Amin, quote, in connection with everything from domestic terrorism to gun running to 14 homicides in Atlanta's West End. After the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center, he was interrogated by the FBI as to whether he had played a role in the attack. Obviously, had nothing to do with that attack. Al-Amin's brother, Ed Brown, stated that, you know, something happened, say the first attempt to bomb the Trade Center, they feed their infallible profile into their computer, Muslim, radical, violent, anti-American, whatever, who knows. Anyway, boom, out spits the names, H. Rap Brown, prominent among them. You know, so it just shows that this is really a decades long, you know, sort of process. Brother Khalid, can you tell us about where we go from here? Brother Kairi talked about the local office in Atlanta looking at re-examining the case, reinvestigating it. Brother Mauri talked about the need for community support. What do you see as the way forward for this case?
You're on mute, brother. Wait. I think you remuted yourself.
All right, there you go.
There you go.
Coming back up. Imam Jamil is so multidimensional. That's one of the things coming out of the civil rights and nationalist Pan-Africanist movement, the urban peace and justice movements, all these movements, he was tied directly to, even in terms of young people that were not necessarily involved with gangs or street organizations. He had major influence in the entertainment industry, as known as as we hear as hip hop right now. His name was rap, you know, and he was known as a rapper, not a rapper like the rappers we see today, but because that meant that he could use rhyme and they say dissing people in the communities, or how to stroke somebody, make them feel, you know, a little bit more brighter or stronger, whatever it is. That was part of his forte. But also the development of the Muslim or Islamic movement in North America amongst a lot of the young people were tied directly into the organization called Al-Ummah. And Al-Ummah would sponsor large gatherings of Muslims, almost the largest, you know, gatherings within the African-American community. And it wasn't just for getting together for social efforts, but it was a magnet, because you would come to a riata at a major college campus and you bring your family. There were athletic teams from the Palestinian community, from the Indo-Pak community, from the African-American community. There were former gang members from Detroit that were leaders of the largest street organizations in the country, called the Vice Lords, the Gangster Disciples, the Blackstone Rangers, El Rukin, the Bloods, the Crips. These were thousands of young people who Imam Jamil was the most important political figure at that time, even though there were other people. He wasn't running for office. He was a political leader in the sense of the streets. Very important. And so what happened is, as we begin to look at what was being done to undermine all of this, you see that the people that our brother has just talked about, it was way above some little small, you know, undermining by the FBI. In fact, Kairi, you were a child. Remember the first incident that when Imam Jamil had left, you know, North Carolina, and he was stopped and targeted by the FBI. We had a riata in North Carolina and Greensboro, which you talked about just a little few minutes ago, Mari, that there was a riata there. Imam Jamil was pulled off the road by armed semi-automatic and automatic weapons, federal agents and this and that. Kairi, I think, was in his arm, was right next to him. And the whole thing was boiling upon a so-called shooting that Imam Jamil was involved in, allegedly shooting a young gang member in West End, which couldn't have taken place in any form or fashion because he was not near the event where this took place. But the FBI forced this young man. He went on record and said that the FBI told him to sign a document that Imam Jamil shot him in the leg. And this young man, he was scared to death. They had something on him. By the time a lot of the lawyers and people got down there and moved on that, they had removed the charges. But that was one that you can see how hell bent they were on getting Imam Jamil not just off the streets, but off of any platform, as they say. Let's just say athletics. I know good too, but Imam Jamil was like an all-American football player, basketball player. So when we had these events, we had a lot of guys that were involved with athletic events and other kind of things that were going on during the time of the riot. They had never had any contact with the criminal justice system. So all of these things were major in terms of the influence and the relationship that he had with other Muslim leaders, non-Muslim leaders from the so-called hip hop community, the leaders that come out of the street organizations, all those different areas, he had a hand in. Very important. So I think it's important that, when we go back and look at what is going to hopefully at least allow another trial to take, Otis Jackson, man, it's a slam dunk if the FBI and their, minions will get their hand out of where we see all that now, right? We see what happens when people get their hands and what happened with the Trumpites. The same thing was going on then with Otis Jackson. When he said he had been shot, he had been wounded. You see why the guy tried to move him off that point, right? The prosecutor, well, he said, look, I got shot. I got shot by the deputy sheriff. The deputy sheriff that shot the man that was 5'6" with gray eyes. So definitely there needs to be a retrial. That means there needs to be some kind of way that we can bring this back to the public view. If not to the public view, definitely into the judicial view of the Supreme Court and other entities.
No, I think, if I may, I think the way forward is clear. I think it's clear from the conversations that we have when we have these talks. The way forward is the people who have benefited from the Imam need to champion him in the way he would champion them. From the ISNAs and ICNAs and MANAs of the world. And I actually have an event coming up on a MANA panel, and I'm very excited about that, and I appreciate it. But he can't be a footnote in your agenda for 2021. He has to be at the top of it. We've mentioned El-Umma a lot of times today, and the current leadership in El-Umma has been noticeably silent, from Philadelphia to Atlanta to wherever. They've been noticeably quiet on the front. And so it's like, this can't be a dua campaign. That's very important. We need that, but it has to be an outspoken campaign, because if we don't show that we care about this thing, then they're not going to move, because they have no incentive to do so. They want him in prison. So unless we give them a reason for him to be out, he's not going to get out. He's not going to get another trial. As long as the people who he championed when he was out here are not championing him, it's a hard fight to win. And so the way forward is he has to become a priority. He hasn't been a priority. That's just the truth. So he has to become a priority in our day-to-day, especially when we have the kind of momentum that we have. His case is currently under review. It's currently under review. And so he'll either be given that new trial or released, or he won't. But it's going to depend on what we do on this side. And so events like this, events like the rest of the events that are coming up over the next, they're very important. But our leadership has to be vocal, It can't just be us.
And Laila, if I can weigh in on a point that he just made, which is a very important point. And I'm going to do it by way of two examples. The first one is an example found in the book that we republished and expanded, the case of Imam Jamil Al-Amin, or the imprisonment. Is it a government conspiracy? One of the chapters in that book deals with the 1968 Olympic protests. This was a major event that garnered international attention. And one of the prime movers, in fact, we have the entire interview that my good friend Heather Gray, a broadcast executive out of Atlanta, Georgia, the interview that she did with the brother who spearheaded that whole campaign, and the linchpin for being able to pull it together and to bring a number of other prominent names into the mix to help them exert pressure. The linchpin of that effort was H. Rap Brown. And so, you know, that speaks to the influence that Imam Jamil as H. Rap Brown had in, you know, circles above and beyond what are viewed as, you know, activist circles. I mean, these were prominent athletes, Muhammad Ali, Lou Alcindor, who later became known as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and a number of others who came on board and were, you know, it helped to make that protest the success that it was. And then we also have on the other example that I wanted to cite is Bosnia. You know, we've heard for a number of years the Bosnian protests that took place when there was genocide taking place in Bosnia. The protests that took, the massive protests that took place here in the US that ended up generating the kind of pressure that enabled politicians to do what they should have done, you know, much early on, and to begin the process of arresting the genocide that was taking place. That huge protest, we often hear that a certain prominent South Asian figure was most responsible for, you know, pulling it together. But in fact, we don't hear that, you know, two of the most prominent elements that were required and, you know, helped to make that the success that it was were African American. One was our sister Aisha Al-Adawiya and her organization Women in Islam Inc. in New York. I mean, they were the initiator of that effort, and then the person who was used to galvanize national leaders and organizations to support that effort, and it end up being a very successful effort, you know, with thousands of people, tens of thousands of people taken to the streets, was Imam Jamil Al-Amin. And I'll never forget the conversation I had with my dear brother Abdul Rahman Al-Amoudi. He said, if it were not for Imam Jamil Al-Amin, the American Muslim Council, which was the major Muslim organization on the block back then, he said it would not have been possible for me to have been for me to have started the organization and for it to have gotten off the way that it did, had it not been for Imam Jamil. And so, you know, again, we have this example of the diversified role that Imam Jamil has played over the years, you know, from his days as H. Rap Brown all the way into becoming Imam Jamil and on up until that, you know, tragedy unfolded in March of 2000. You know, we have examples, multiple examples of how significant he was. And as a result of that multi-dimensional significance, the responsibility we have, we owe him to stand up.
Just to piggyback off of what you said, those two major movements that you brought up that took public pressure.
That's
and
right.
So to show you the flip side of what we're dealing with, Brother Mauri Saalakhan, you were at our rally, and I'm sure you were just as disappointed as I was with our turnout for Imam Jamil. You know, we didn't have, not only didn't the community show up, the leadership didn't show up, but we had celebrities in the park who took time out of their day. We had rappers who came out there and took time out of their day to come and speak to us. And so again, the way forward is simple: reciprocate. reciprocate what Imam Jamil has done for you. And this isn't me talking to the panel. This is me talking to whoever may be watching and whoever may watch it in the future. If you've been affected positively, if the Imam has gone out of his way for you or your folks, go out of your way for him, please. We need your help. We need your help. You know, he needs your help. Not even me, whatever. He needs your help.
Right.
And you know, like, again, we organized a national rally in the park across the street from his masjid, and we didn't have any of our leadership, Black Muslim imams, none of that. They weren't there. They just didn't show. And so when we say, now we have to start having real conversations, because when we ask what the way forward is, if we don't talk about the issues with the way forward, then we're not going to move forward. So, you know, a lot of these people are who they are on the backs of Imam Jamil. Show him that respect that he deserves.
One of the attendees is asking specifically, what can I or we do to make our voices heard? Who do we pressure? She says, I consider myself a white anti-racist accomplice.
We're actually in the process. If you go to freeimamjamil.com right now, it points to what happened to Rap. By the end of the day today, it'll actually point to a kind of to-do list for folks. And so the first thing on the to-do list, and really the most important thing, is a letter to the people. Their names will be listed in the file. It's an email to the folks who are in charge of making that move happen. Again, we're currently in the process of investigating, and so harassing the DA and the conviction integrity unit, it's cool, but it's on us. The ball's kind of in our court with them. But we need him to get his medical treatment. We need him moved back to Georgia. And so I'm currently, actually, after I get off of this, I have to finish drafting the letter that we want people to copy and paste and send out to the representatives here. Because one of the things that just happened in Georgia is everybody's making an uproar about Georgia turned blue. So let's see if that means anything. And so we're going to reach out to these blue folks and see if they're willing to help assist us. Not even in the justice part. We're willing to do that work. Just help us make it fair and treat this man like a human being.
And your father was never treated like a typical case, even from the beginning, but also throughout, in the sense that he was at one point put in the supermax. It's a state case. It's a state of Georgia case. He was moved to the most restrictive, the harshest conditions in the United States of any prison. It's the supermax in Colorado, which is an underground prison. Can you maybe talk about that experience that he had, what that was like for him, and some of the restrictions he had to face?
Sure. Well, his restrictions, the supermax is it's just a different monster. You feel like you're in prison when you visit the supermax. It's a taxing emotional experience for the visitors. So I can only imagine what he went through. I've actually posted recently, maybe a couple months ago, a picture of a cell from the supermax, just so people could get an understanding of what his 23 hours a day look like there. But even in Arizona, where he is now, which is also a federal penitentiary, you know, he's relatively confined. Yeah, it's technically population, but he's relatively confined. He's always on extreme confinement, but his housing by the federal government, even with this deal that they have on the table with Georgia that allows them to house Georgia prisoners, shows their disdain for Imam Jamil. There are federal prisons in Georgia. There are federal prisons close to Georgia, but no, they put him in the supermax because they have a vendetta. They moved him out of the supermax and sent him further away because they have a vendetta. And so, yeah, now at this point, they play with his mail. As I said, he can't see. He's been on a list to get a cataract surgery for 2 years. When he went on the list, he wasn't blind. He's completely blind now and needs assistance reading his medications just so he could take the right medication. What that also does is means he can't get legal mail, because who's going to read the legal mail to him? He can't read it, and he can't respond to it because he can't see. And so everything is adding up to him not being able to, one, effectively defend himself, but two, this is just cruel and unusual. At what point do we start questioning the humanity here? Like, this is ridiculous.
Brother Mauri, can you talk about whether the movement for Black Lives, or the fact that the last 10 years, there's been much more awareness about the human rights of Black Americans, about state repression, police violence, police brutality? Has the movement for Black Lives been involved in the case of Imam Jamil, and sort of what connections have you seen been made?
I have not seen any indications that there is there has been any conversations, and that's where it has to begin, you know, conversations within certain circles about Imam Jamil Al-Amin, the political prisoner who has been locked down now for the past 2 decades. I see this time that we're in right now as a very, a potentially fruitful time. This is a moment in American history when there is another opportunity. I have been encouraged by much of what I've seen in terms of activism. I've been greatly encouraged because we went through a period, I would say, beginning in earnest, you know, really beginning in 1980 when Reagan assumed the presidency. We went through a period, a whole generation of conscious folk seem to have been lost, you know, when it comes to these kinds of issues. But now with, you know, with this very unique place that we're in now globally, you know, with the global pandemic, with the political polarization that has gripped much of the world, especially the United States of America. And then on top of that, you know, the renewed Black Lives Matter movement. This is not, you know, the Black Lives Matter is not anything new. In fact, one of the things that I often say to some of my immigrant brother leaders is that, you know, there is no path to power or security in the United States that does not intersect through Black roots. We have a very unique sociological experience. And this latest resurgence of Black Lives Matter communal mentality is just, you know, it is a resurgence. This is what it is, but I have been encouraged by it. And while there hasn't been to date, to my knowledge, any real substantive discussions about Imam Jamil Al-Amin and his political imprisonment within this network, I'm hoping, you know, I'm guardedly optimistic that, you know, with programs like this one today and others that are taking place, that we will see this happen. We will, you know, we will see young activists who have the courage to challenge the system in ways that it needs to be challenged, you know, come to a realization that we had this defining figure. We have this individual who represents a precedent, setting litmus test for us all. That they'll come to a realization of this, and they will begin to give attention to Imam Jamil, the attention that he should have received a long time ago.
And Brother Khalid, I wanted to kind of ask you a similar question. You're on mute, so make sure you unmute yourself. But how do you see kind of Imam Jamil's case fitting into this larger context of Black Lives Matter now? And also, if you can tell us about your own personal experience with him, what's he like as a person?
Man, he's the only man that I ever met in my life that would call from a facility like that underground hell place before they took those rights away from him to call out. And the first thing he would say after giving me the salams is that, "You need anything?" And I couldn't, man, that's a heck of a thing to hear. And how do you even respond to that? But that's who he is. When I said he's the multi-man. We were at a Riata, right? This, if you don't mind, this is a Riata. I keep talking about the Riatas because Riatas has been the largest African-American gathering place of Muslims since it started. And it wasn't started by Imam Jamil, but it was started by the Dar al-Islam movement, of which he became a part of, and it became, you know, one of the biggest cars that would draw people from different ethnic groups. So we would make it, Imam Jamil would tell us, this is his intentionality. He said, make sure you have the brothers from Canada bring a team down. make sure you get somebody from this city or this organization. Does ICNA have any wrestlers or to have any kind of involvement in some way with this kind of effort? And these are the kind of things that he would do. You know, as I said, his involvement in athletics. And I know a lot of people might think that that's important to see the national leader of your organization on a basketball court playing with young men. You know, I mean, and they weren't playing, they were playing for keeps. He was also one of the most heralded football quarterbacks in Louisiana. A lot of people didn't know that until we were somewhere one day and one guy was calling Imam Jamil out and said, "Hey man, throw that pill to me," meaning football. And Imam Jamil throwing the football went right through his hands and hit him in the chest. That's the kind of person he was. So, I mean, all of that weighs into the reason why he was so personable. He was so engaging. He motivated people. The book, The Revolution by the book, The Rapper's Life, is still, you know, still being read in prisons throughout the United States. The whole aspect around what he meant to changing people around, just in terms of their own morals and how they saw themselves even outside of our own inner circle. This is the real truth. Imam Jamil came to one of the riadas. They were running behind schedule. He got there late and guys were not dressed properly. So he said, "Look, man, we're not gonna have no game right now." And everybody's, "Well, what's wrong? You guys are wearing pants that are halfway up your thigh leg." And it made me seem, you know, real, you know, so what, and then later on, guys didn't come to any more riadas. They wore their shorts they come below the knee, right? Am I right? am I right, Kairi? Not too long after that, the #1 college basketball team in America, I think it was Louisville or Kentucky, their whole team broke out with those shorts on, with the legs, the knees not being set. There was so much, there's the social, political, entertainment,
Michigan.
all of these. Yeah, he influenced all of that and continues to influence it through this presence and struggle. So yeah, hopefully a lot of those stories will be told. You know, but and the other thing, in terms of the IJAN organization, and some of us are trying to reorganize for that. We lost 2 of our, and I know you know, Imam Khalil passed away. He was one of the big pushers of IJAN, and also our good brother Amir Yahya Abdul Sabur passed away. And so hopefully we have some people that are going to be taking those slots and upping their you know, involvement in IJAN and the role that IJAN is playing, and other people as well. But you know, I hope that I answered your question. You know, he's the leader of the leaders. I mean, I can just put it this way, by example, not somebody just talked about it, but he walked the walk as well as he talked the talk.
I did want to mention, I should have mentioned this at the top, but this event is being held by the Coalition for Civil Freedoms. You can go to the website, civilfreedoms.org. And Brother Mauri, you're having a discussion on Sunday about Imam Jamil Al-Amin's case. I should mention this is part of a program for Black History Month. Tell us about your event on Sunday.
Yeah, on Sunday, we're going to have our brother Kairi back with us again. You know, he is the spearhead for this national campaign on behalf of his father. And but we're also going to have another young brother with us who knows the Imam Jamil Al-Amin, the family and the community well. Brother Masood Abdul Haq is a brother who wrote a very powerful piece that is also featured in the book, and it's up on website. It's accessible. You can just pull it up. Growing Up West End. So he's going to be with us on Sunday to talk about what it was like, you know, what it was like to grow up under the leadership of Imam Jamil Al-Amin, especially in a community that was in a point, it was in a place of transition. You know, one of the things that I'll never forget during the trial of Imam Jamil, after he was unjustifiably found guilty, and then they moved to the sentencing phase where in the determination needed to be made as to whether he would receive life or the death penalty. The government was pushing the death penalty. They wanted to kill him. One of the most prominent African-American leaders in the US took the stand on Imam Jamil's behalf during the sentencing phase. Andrew Young, former mayor of Atlanta, former US ambassador to the United Nations, and a civil rights icon in his own right. He took the stand in defense of Imam Jamil after he was convicted. And he spoke about, you know, how Imam Jamil, the man that he has known all of these years, you know, what the accusations against him defies the man that he has known for all of the years that he's known him, going back to the quote unquote civil rights days, you know, H. Rap Brown. And he also spoke about how initially when his daughter made the decision to move to the West End, he was a little concerned because of the reputation that the West End had as a very unstable and a dangerous place to live. But then as he became aware of the transition that the community had already started going through because of the presence of Imam Jamil in the community mosque, he said he felt much easier about his daughter moving to the West End. And so, you know, this is the kind of conversation, this is part of the conversation that we're going to be having on Sunday on the Salam Media broadcast network out of Johannesburg, South Africa, inshallah.
And you can watch that program on Salam Media's Facebook and YouTube pages. I just wanted, before we wrap up, I wanted to give you each a chance for one final thought that viewers can take away with on the imprisonment of Imam Jamil Al-Amin. Kairi, we could start with you.
All right, and the final thought that I always like to leave these with is just that the Imam is innocent. And because a lot of conversations I've had over my life have with people about my father has been that they were taught, you know, he did it, but we love our Imam. And it's hard to get people to fight for someone's freedom if they don't feel like he deserves it. And so understanding that he is innocent, he did not commit these crimes is like step one for us being able to have any kind of movement or any kind of motion in getting him released for a crime he didn't commit. And so the Imam is still the Imam that you knew before he went in, and he always has been, and he again deserves our support. One thing I did forget to mention is if you visit the What Happened to Rap website and you feel the urge to want to give some money, we no longer, well, we do have a launch good up. If you want to just donate, that's cool, but we also have this merchandise. It says, let me see if I can get me in. Yeah, it says free rap, still innocent on the hats. We have shirts, we have hoodies, we have phone cases. On the back of the shirts and the hoodies, they're actually a list of facts that lend to his innocence. And so you can be a walking billboard as well as support a little financially if you so choose. And that again is on the What Happened to Rap website.
I actually feel like there's so much to your father's life. He's 77 years old. We barely scratched the surface of everything he did. At one point, he served as the chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, which was also a role held by the late Congressman John Lewis. His life truly was devoted to nonviolence, even, you know, with all the different roles that he held. Brother Mauri, do you have a final thought?
Yes, another voice in the book, the imprisonment of Imam Jamil Al-Amin, Is It a Government Conspiracy, is that of the late Coretta Scott King, the widow of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. During the trial, in the early days of the trial, I and another brother, Brother Talal, we visited the King Center for the purpose of talking to Mrs. King. You know, my thought was that if we could get her to make a statement in support of a fair trial, it would carry some weight. We made this request of her, and she immediately responded again. And that response was based upon her relationship, upon her knowledge of who this man was going back many years. When we took the statement that Mrs. King released, and that statement is in the book in its entirety, and we made copies of it and shared it with the media that was covering the trial and shared it with many others. The very next day, I'll never forget it, a number of editorials hit the newspapers attacking Mrs. King for interfering. This is how deep it was. This is one of the most prominent, public folk in the South, and they attacked her for simply calling for a fair trial. And I say that to say, this is an example of the kind of atmosphere that has surrounded the case of Imam Jamil for all of these years. On the day that Imam Jamil was sentenced, it was either the day that he was convicted, no, the day he was sentenced, because he didn't get the death penalty. When he was sentenced to life imprisonment, the very next day, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, a major Muslim daily in Atlanta, Georgia, they published an editorial. The editorial read, "Jamil Al-Amin will die in prison, alone and forgotten," quote unquote. This is the agenda of the establishment that once and up until now has successfully buried this leader alive. We cannot allow this to happen. We must do everything we possibly can to push back, exert pressure, and get this brother freed and back to his family and community where he belongs. I encourage everyone to go to the website, What Happened to Rap, the number 2, What Happened to Rap.com. Educate yourself, and also, get the book. Purchase the book. That book will help to educate you, and it will also help us in the campaign that we have launched for Imam Jamil and other political prisoners whose cases will not receive the kind of attention that Imam Jamil's case is receiving, even though it is not the amount of attention that he deserves. I think you're mute, my sister.
Brother Khalid, if you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, it just show you how Allah is the best of planners. It coincides exactly with what you were saying. As I said to you, we started a movement called the Urban Peace and Justice Movement, which was set up all around the country to bring in young people to stop engaging in what we call fratricide, brothers killing brothers. They wear the same clothes, they do the same dances, they catch the same hell, and they're mirror reflections of each other. And that was the basis for us to bring Bloods and Crips and all these groups. They came to us because of Imam Jamil and the leadership of the imams and the community organizer under the umbrella of the protection of the Muslims. Every summit we had, when the Bloods and Crips tied their rags, their scarves together to create the greatest, the most influential peace treaty on the West Coast, they were in a masjid. The masjid was affiliated with Imam Jamil's leadership. In Chicago, which had the largest array of street organizations in America, in North America, when they had the first gatherings as to what we were going to do to try to bring peace to the streets in Chicago, which was the number 2 homicide capital in America. Number 1 was LA. It was held at a masjid connected with the leadership of Imam Jamil Al-Amin. Thirdly, that year, our organization, the Council for Urban Peace, Justice, and Empowerment, was chosen by Coretta Scott King and many other civil rights leaders to receive the Torch Award at the annual gathering of what we call the March on Washington. A lot of people don't know that happened. We still probably the only Muslim agent group that came together to bring together leaders until the Reverend, what's his name, that has his own talk show, the
Al Sharpton.
Al Sharpton. All of these other groups, we've never been able to bring all these groups together. The park rangers tried to stop the Muslims and the guys that were wearing their bandanas from going up to the pedestal to receive the award from Coretta Scott King, and she stopped them from doing it. Later on, we decided we were going to go to Washington, D.C. And the one that came up with that idea was a young man that was part of an organization called the Black Guerrilla Family, which is one of the largest, most influential gang or street organization in the prisons in California. And it was him that came up with the concept of the Million Man March. This had to do with the fact that Imam Jamil and other leaders who had been targeted by Zionist organizations were told that they came to the the organization, efforts and all that they weren't going to sign checks over them, this and that. And Coretta Scott King allegedly told them, keep your checks. A lot of that influence had to do with what you're talking about, Imam Jamil's influence into the historical civil rights community, the Jesse Jackson, and all the people that he worked with, as well as the King family. That just shows you that no matter what they do, men and Shaitan plan a plan, but Allah plans a plan. He is the best of planners. We can't lose with the stuff we use.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you all so much. I'm so sorry we ran out of time, but I know that I learned a lot today, and I just wanted to once again thank everybody at the Coalition for Civil Freedoms, thank our panelists for doing this really important discussion. And you can learn more again at whathappened2rap.com, and check out the movie Judas and the Black Messiah, which in some ways is a stark reminder of Imam Jamil's case. Actually, Imam Jamil appears as H. Rap Brown at the beginning of the movie. It comes out today. And it's, as Brother Kairi said at the beginning, it's a reminder that these cases continue today, and it's not in the past. Thank you all once again, and see you at the next CCF program.
Thank you.